We are living in a computer-programmed reality, and the only clue we have to it is when some variable is changed and some alteration in our reality occurs. We would have the overwhelming impression that we were reliving the present, déjà vu, perhaps in precisely the same way, hearing the same words, saying the same words. I submit that these impressions are valid and significant, and I will even say this: such an impression is a clue that at some past time point a variable was changed, reprogrammed as it were, and that because of this an alternative world branched off.
Good afternoon, and welcome to the Friday edition of Free Association Radio, aka FAR. This is the Friday Farcast, and I'm Robert Phoenix. I'm your host. I'll be here for the next 2 hours, and today we have three, count them, 1, 2, 3, fantastic guests. It's going to be jam-packed, station to station, information coming at you. The first guest is a person that I've had on for a couple times over the course of the last 3 years, a dear friend, and she gives good radio. That's what I've been told. Sarah Nash, a.k.a. the Cosmic Cooker, and she'll be followed by Clay Coldren, a.k.a. Mancalled Clay, who has a new CD out. It's fantastic. It's called Bringing, with an emphasis on the ing. We'll ask him about the ing part of it. We'll play a couple of tracks and get some insight into his process. And finally, in the last portion of the show, the final 100 and final 80 minutes, 1 hour and 20 minutes, my interview with researcher Ian R. Crane from England, and it's a really fantastic conversation, and I urge you to hold on and listen to it. And all parts of the show, all three parts of the Holy Trinity. And I call today's show a Soothsayer, a Bricklayer, and a Dragon Slayer. And you'll understand why as we get into the show here. So let me not waste any more time, since time is so precious here on this planet right now, while we're still experiencing time. Let's bring on Miss Sarah Nash, a.k.a. the Cosmic Cooker.
Friday to you.
Hello.
Hi, can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Oh, good. You said hello like you couldn't hear me, and I was frightened.
There is a bit of a lag time in the technology here, so I sometimes miss the first, half a second when somebody says something, which is kind of odd because it starts a conversation off in a weird way. But because you and I are such skilled communicators, we can overcome this.
Absolutely. I'm already over it. Let's talk about Cloud Atlas and why it wasn't nominated. I got to tell you, that was the first thing that I thought of this morning. Intelligence is dangerous. And talking about time and traveling through time and getting from point A to point B, that just kind of blew me away. The Wachowski brothers, well, brother and sister now.
Yeah, that's
completely and utterly overlooked.
Well, yes. I think what happened is that, they kind of blew the cover on reality when they made The Matrix. And Cloud Atlas is yet kind of another iteration of they're an interesting, weird duo. I'm digressing a little bit. Have you ever seen their first movie, Bound?
No, I'm writing it down right now. Everybody else needs to too. Bound.
Bound. Bound is it's with Meg. What's her name? She plays poker. Oh man, she was in The Handmaid's Tale, and then Gina. I'm blanking out. Last names are eluding me today. Anyway, watch Bound. It's about their relationship, and it's about Joe Pantoliano, who's also in The Matrix. It's part crime heist, part hot sex, lesbian love affair, and part S&M. It's a very interesting film. And that theme comes up for them from time to time. It came up for them in the movie V for Vendetta, which they did as well.
Oh, Jennifer Tilly and Gina Gershon.
Jennifer
I'm
Tilly
looking at it right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, oh, I have seen this.
Meg Tilly's her sister. So Jennifer Tilly, she should be called Jennifer Fertilly. She's like amazingly fertile, buxom woman. But
yeah, she's definitely. Hi, how are ya?
Yeah.
Okay, that's what's going on.
So
I get
anyway,
it.
The Wachowski brothers tend to have two themes in their movies, and they tend to be typified, I think, by each brother. One of whom, by the way, is now Wanda. I think Wanda Wachowski.
Yeah.
So sex augmentation. So they have two themes in the movies generally that would show up, which you see also in V for Vendetta. And one of the themes is kind of deviance.
No, not Wanda, Lana.
Lana.
Her name's Lana now.
Lana, okay. So
yeah.
So deviance is one theme that shows up in their films. And then the other theme that shows up is this manipulation of reality. And Cloud Atlas gets into some very interesting territory around timelines, more specifically, how past and future lives affect each other, and also who's pulling the strings. And that's why it was completely ignored. So, yeah, that's my take.
What a stunning, stellar, amazing cast. And people who know their stuff, and the only one that represented was Halle Berry, and she wasn't there because of Cloud Atlas. And I mean, the fact that it was overlooked even for a musical award. The theme, I downloaded it, of course, off of iTunes, and just, it plays constantly back here. And it is just stunning. Not even a mention, not even a nod. What does that tell you?
Well, it tells me that the Babylonian black magicians of Hollywood, who have incarnated through the Temple of Solomon and now run most of Hollywood, much to people's chagrin, don't want their dirty little secrets getting out. That's what it means. That's what it says to me, because they've been manipulating reality through occult symbols and magical acts for well over 2,000 years now, and they still do it. And their augmentation has only increased with the advance in technology. That's why it was a complete and utter miss at the Oscars. And it's also sending a message, theoretically, to the Wachowski brothers, although they have enough money where they really don't give a hoot. But also other filmmakers, that if you are going to get into this territory, you're not going to be supported. Critics won't support you. You may not make any money, and guess what? You may have the finest piece of art out there, but we're not even going to give you a sniff at the Oscars. That's the message.
It's terrifying. The foundation of a healthy republic is being well-informed. And they don't want us to become well-informed, and this makes me think of an article that I read last night. Actually, no, I was perusing Facebook. I came across a woman who was on a tirade about the fact that the sun is in a cage, and all light workers who are talking about the light and recombinant DNA and DNA activations, it's all a bunch of, it's not necessarily a crock, but that we, people like me, I felt personally attacked, even though she doesn't know me from anybody. Light workers are the new demonic race on the planet. How about that?
Yeah, well, I mean, did you say Republicans? Did you say Republicans?
No, I said it was that intelligence is being well informed is the foundation of a healthy republic or civilization.
Oh yeah, I totally agree. I completely agree with you, and that is not the case. You know, I did a show on Monday about transhumanism and virtual reality and this reality, and the reality that we currently exist in is really becoming bifurcated into one reality which represents mediocrity and banality and mundanity, and the other version is depravity. And there's no real middle ground for people to have rich and resonant lives. So to your point, these are two strategies that are used to keep people uninformed. So I would agree.
Well, you know, I think it was Gary Zukov who said that it's not possible. We can't even begin to understand our souls or our higher selves or even our intuition if we don't come to terms with the existence of non-physical reality. And
it's important. I completely agree with you, because the existence of non-physical reality is ultimately death, and we spend all of our lives avoiding death. We do everything in our power to avoid death. You know, we have breast augmentations. Whoa. Well, I know.
Breast augmentations and death.
Well, no, Botox, right? I mean, these are all things that stave off, in our mind.
Aging.
Yeah. Aging is the Greyhound bus to death, right? I mean, that's what it is. So, I would say he's right, and I think ultimately it comes down to we as a culture, as a society, we just are not reconciled death. That's what it's about.
Well, but then we have movies like Cloud Atlas that show us that death is just another giant adventure into the new one universe and over and over again.
I agree. I mean, one of the things I did when I was in college, one of the first things I did in my interdisciplinary studies class was a cross-cultural examination of death, because I wanted to find out what was going on. Raymond Moody's books, I got into them. At that time, they were very fresh. He was he was one of the few people, working with people that had near-death experiences. And then I got into the Tibetan Book of the Dead and the Egyptian Book of the Dead. And it's out there. It's been out there for a while. They're just recontextualizing it and putting it into a cinematic form. And I agree with you, but there's something terrifying about losing the form. So, Sarah, you've astral traveled, right? You've gone out of body, right?
Oh, absolutely. I died on the operating table when I was 12 years old. I was having a... Oh, wait a minute. There's serious feedback. Whoa. Stop that. Okay, that's better. Say something.
I'm here.
Okay, good. All right. I thought, oh, no, I lost it. I'm always losing it. No, I died on the operating table when I was 12 years old, clinically dead. And I tripped the light fantastic. Mm-hmm. And because I was a child, people were very interested, including the medical people, the personnel in the hospital. And it's been what's the word for it when something is published. It's oh gosh, I can't think either. Mercury retrograde. Let's not ever do this during a Mercury retrograde. It's canceled. But I went into the light. There is a light. There is a tunnel. And I had no idea. I knew nothing like that. I knew nothing of anything like that. I was a nice little Mormon girl, had my operation at Children's Hospital in Salt Lake City, Utah. My doctor was an incredible physician, surgeon. And when I came back, I started telling everybody what I'd seen and what I'd heard. And the first thing I asked was, why, first of all, I wanted to know why I was naked from my waist up and what all the red stuff was on my body, which, of course, was just a betadine solution that they use when people are in surgery. And they just all looked at me with stunned expressions. And I'm just like, And then they had a portion of my face peeled over to reduce the chance of becoming paralyzed with such a delicate operation, they had to expose the nerves, so they made sure that they didn't touch it as well as other things, which is one of the reasons why my face isn't completely symmetrical, but that's besides the point. I had all this information. I was able to see myself on the operating table, and I had facts. This wasn't just, I floated up and I saw. No, I actually traveled through the hospital when I came back from my experience when I tripped the Light Fantastic. And it is the Light Fantastic. It truly is. I left my body after I floated up and out, and I went into this vast, just ineffable universe, and there were trillions of silver strands that were coming from different places throughout the universe heading towards a light. The most brilliant, incredible, moving, it's again, you can't describe this light, and it just exuded love, utter and complete love. And I was stopped. I was stopped, and the next thing I know, I'm standing in the garden at the hospital, and my mother, God bless her, I'm still trying to find my biological mother, but that's a different story for a different day. She was crying, and I'd never seen her cry before. My mother was sitting in the garden at the hospital, and whatever divine providence decided that I needed to see her. And I felt at that moment that I couldn't leave because my mother missed me. And it was the first time in my entire life that I'd ever seen any love with regard to me from this woman. So I stayed. But I had details, I had facts, and when I returned and I began asking the nurses and my doctor, people came in to interview me. So it's chronicled.
Right. Well, I think that what you experienced was something along the lines of, what they would experience in the temples and the pyramids of Egypt, where people would go through and they would have these major kind of rituals and these magical operations, and if you didn't get it right, you would die. If you did
absolutely. In fact, one of those, to become a Melchizedek priest, the final thing that you had to do was literally go into the light, but you had to go into the darkness. You had to swim in a chamber underwater completely.
Dark.
And there were crocodiles and alligators in this chamber, and if you made it out alive, then you became a Melchizedek.
Right. So there's variations on that, and so you face your own mortality, and something profound takes place as a result of that. So when I started to go out of body, this is in my early 20s, it was always terrifying. I never got used to it. I never got used to going out of my third eye. I would always freak out. So it takes a while, but if we had 7 billion people that theoretically all died simultaneously even if it was for 15 seconds, which would be an eternity out of body, and came back, how different would the world look? How different would people live their lives? What would they say yes or no to simultaneously? It'd be a mind blower. In some ways, that's what the planet kind of needs, actually.
In fact, yes, I would have to agree 100%. We all need this, and that's what Timothy Leary and Terence McKenna, when Terence and his buddies got together and sat in the jungle some years ago and decided to create the date, they said that everybody needed a date to focus on, which was the 2012 hoopla. And one of his friends was a astrologer or a historian, actually, with certain gifts with regard to antiquities, and so they chose this Mayan calendar because they thought it was hysterical. This was all a drug-infused conversation.
Right. They were just led to it, basically, and then he started
to put
his algorithms. Then he did time wave zero with the i-ching, and it all mapped out. Some people don't really. Some people don't really, hold a lot of water with Terence's stuff. I tend to feel pretty strongly about it. And in fact, in the third interview or the third part of the show today, Ian Crane and I actually talk about this, and we talk about life after 2112, which if you look at it, even from a detached perspective, what's happened since then? Well, the Pope is stepping down. We've had these massive comets. Some very interesting and strange stuff, some dark stuff is taking place. I mean, we are accelerating right now, post 12/21/12. People thought that you'd wake up on 12/22/12 and everybody who was an asshole would be gone, but that's not really the case.
Well, and then that's where the world needs to die and then become reborn ideology came from with regard to what you said earlier. What if 7 billion people died and they were dead for 15 seconds and they all remembered it and came back? What then?
Right.
No, I mean, I think that it's, is it, in a way, the Groundhog Day scenario sort of comes into my head. We're going to have these people throwing themselves off of cliffs like lemmings because they know that there's life after death, and, excuse my French, but fuck this place. I think that a lot of people would just check out, knowing that there's something more on the other side and they can have a do-over. I mean, there's a lot of people who talk about how this is just a video game.
Right.
And that one of the reasons that kids get so involved and they have no idea about the sanctity of life is because they've got 10 more. Oh, God, my dude died.
Right.
Oh, I'm going to have to reboot my game or whatever the heck it is. I don't play video games anymore. I stopped years and years ago. I stopped with Super Mario Brothers, but I mean, there's this whole lack of respect for the sanctity of life because, heck, I'm a cat. I got 9 more.
Right. Now, there was a movie not long ago, and it starred Matt Damon, and he played.
Sorry, I have to do that. I did that for my daughter. Hey, Tori, I love you. Okay, go on.
He played a survivor. He had a near-death experience and was a psychic.
Oh yeah, that was a great movie.
Well, so my take on that, my take on stuff is a little slanted, obviously, but my take on that was that it was Hereafter is the name of the film. That it was it got to this in some interesting areas, especially the relationship with Dickens. That was really cool. And Charles Dickens, there are people that think that Charles Dickens was actually from the future and came back to Victorian times to kind of lay the groundwork and show people how inhumane life could not only be but could become. So that was an interesting piece. But there's also an underscoring theme in the film where death is much nicer than life. Like, death is really cool, right? And if you get into the whole depopulation meme, now death becomes this kind of like propagandistic tool. Like, if this goes back to the whole virtual reality transhumanist piece. If this reality sucks and it's so bad, then why not just boot yourself up into the exonet and be something else or be somebody else or be someone different? So if they constrain the rules of engagement in this realm, then why not death, right? Isn't death...
Well, exactly. But see, that's what I think a lot of us are if we actually began to understand our divine origins and we had the memories that were taken from us as a result, and now I'm getting into Urantia stuff, but if we knew, if we remembered where we came from and where we can go, we might understand that this is, in fact, limbo, that we are, in fact, in hell, and that if we begin to translate everything to its highest possible power and remember our divine core, and this goes to DNA activations, which I truly believe in the divine genome, and I for one, this is my own personal opinion, okay, that really all we need to do is remember our divine origins and the activation of the divine genome, and whether you want to call it the Holy Spirit or the cosmic cord, whatever it is, if we were to remember where we came from and where we're going and how we got here, that in and of itself is we are being tested. And so I'm trying to draw a line here because I know you're going to have to shut me down here really, really quickly. But the bottom line is that we're here to remember, and that is part of our journey. Right. And once we remember, by God, we'll never forget again.
So we all theoretically, I think there's a TV show about some event happening and people all blanked out simultaneously and then they all woke up. And there was a TV show about this not long ago.
Oh yeah, there's television shows and movies. Yeah,
But I was talking with a friend last night, late at night, and we were talking about the sequester and what potentially could come out of the sequester, which, if you listen to the White House, could be an absolute disaster because it's always a disaster. They want to bring us to the edge of some kind of precipice, whether it's the fiscal cliff or the sequester or whatever that thing is now, right?
Right.
And a lot of that is fear, and yet it's more than just fear because what they did with the fiscal cliff is they increased taxes. And it's hurting people, and they increased taxes through things like.
It's devastating. It's not just hurting people; it's devastating.
Yeah, it's so these things are, even though they do foment fear, they are quite real, impacting people's lives. And so we were talking about this, and like, well, what's going to happen if everything just breaks down and they just start ripping apart these programs? Which, by the way, Ron Paul wanted to do, but he wanted to do it consciously versus unconsciously, which is happening now.
Define consciousness.
Well, consciously meaning I'm making a choice. Consciousness, in my estimation, is volition. Mm-hmm. So if you make a choice, then unconsciousness is you're setting something up and you're allowing chaos, random chaos, to play out. I do think they are making a choice in their own way. But it's almost like an anti-choice, to be honest with you, or so I guess it would be anti-consciousness, if there could be such. I think there is. Anyway, what I was saying is that what we were talking about was that Michael Savage, who's a talk show host, is now the #1 rated talk show host in the country, and the reason why he is because he's confrontational, and people that have aggression like to listen to him. They get angry. They get angry, right? Alex Jones has crossed the Rubicon. Alex Jones is on Piers Morgan. Alex Jones is on Howard Stern. I guarantee you within 1 month, Alex Jones will be on Jon Stewart. Maybe he's already been on Jon Stewart. He'll be on Bill Maher. Alex Jones will be everywhere. And Alex Jones's role is to incite people. And what they want is they want an armed conflict. This is what it's all coming down to. They want an armed conflict.
I agree with you. So what are you going to do?
Well, okay.
The world wants to know what Robert Phoenix is going to do.
I told my friend that this is the absolute wrong thing to do. Absolute wrong. We can't go down that path. Ian and I talk a little bit about that as well. What I personally, and I practice this every day of my life, is I don't do anything. And I do my best to stay home and do my show and help people. I go out and I buy stuff. I buy food or gas or whatever. But I think if we really wanted to impact the world, all people need to do is stay home for like 2 months. That's it. Stay home for 2 months. You don't go to work. You don't buy shit. You stock up for 60 days. You stock up for 60 days. You don't drive. You pull your kids out of school, and you just stay home. And you get to know your neighbors.
Let's do it. Let's start a movement. Stay at home. Occupy your house.
Occupy your house. Right.
Yeah, let's do it. Somebody make a website and
it's called the Stay-at-Home Revolution.
Yeah, occupy yourself. Occupy your home.
Streets, you don't protest. You just stay home, right?
My agoraphobic tendencies love this plan. Let's do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The key to changing the world is by doing nothing.
Be the change you wish to see.
And I thought about this. It's like, well, then what, right? So if people did that, all of a sudden, what would reality look like? Would they try to pass off reality as still happening? Like, would they have all these little people like the Kardashians and, Kanye and all these, and all these phony events? Meanwhile, everybody knows that it's not real. It's not happening because they're not participating. So at least we'd be able to get to see a schism between what they're projecting and what's really taking place. And then let's just say that people got nervous. Well, people aren't buying gas. People aren't doing this. People aren't doing that. What are they going to do? Are they going to send the cops to your home and hit a baton on your door and say, get the hell out of here and go to work? I mean, is that going to happen? And then what? And then let's just say, okay. We give in. You guys win. Do we have a list of demands? Like, well, then what? It's like, well, And here's what I thought. I just thought that what would happen is that you really wouldn't even need a list of demands. You wouldn't even really need to say, well, we need to have gasoline forever at $1.99 a gallon. And if you don't have it for $1.99 a gallon, we're going to do it again. You know, I mean, I don't think it would have to be like that, because I think what would happen is that within that 60-day period, that people would change so much that there would be a complete revolution in how people would think and feel. And they would say, we don't even need the world in the same way anymore. We may not even need government. We can just do this fine on ourselves. Just go away. I mean, I think that that's ultimately what would happen. And then people would say, what if we did this? What if we did this? What if we did this? How creative can we be?
Well, now, but what is frightening, though, I mean, on the other hand, let's take a look at the opposite side of that spectrum. If that is forced upon us, if we don't have a choice, let's just say, you know, there was a very popular show out recently. I haven't watched television in a while, but about all the lights going out, all the electricity was gone. I don't know. People will know what that is, revolution or something.
Yeah, no.
And
yeah.
So, but the choice to stay at home and do nothing was literally forced upon them, and suddenly there was no more electronics. I mean, you couldn't sit in front of the internet or the television or anything.
It's called martial law. That's what it is. Yeah.
And
so you could take it in. Let's just declare martial law for ourselves. We've just declared martial law.
As long as we could do it ourselves, as long as there was a vast majority who said, "Yeah, let's occupy our homes."
Yeah, well, we just we just get right out in front of this whole thing, right? We'd be like, "Hey, we know martial law's coming. We're just going to call it for you right now. Don't worry, we're staying home. You know, we're out ahead of this. We got your back. You go do your thing. We're just going to barbecue."
Barbecue at my place.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
We could call it PMS. Be pre-martial law syndrome or something like that.
Well, now you're making fun of something that's holy and sacred.
Well, why couldn't this be?
Don't knock PMS. PMS causes change, but that's.
So with this.
Well, and you know, I'm going to end with just this here real quickly. It's that, you know, y'all have PMS too. Just because you don't bleed doesn't mean you don't have a monthly cycle.
Oh, I know. It's true. It's absolutely true. Especially for men, because as men get older, they have less testosterone. It's just a fact of life. So they have more estrogen, which makes us moodier and grouchier. And yeah, I would say you're right. Men eventually. The grumpy old man is kind of a perpetual model of PMS, actually. So, there we go.
I think I was married to one for a while.
I'm still waiting for Clay to call in, and he's I think it's a Mercury retrograde thing. So, you know, just kind of on a lighter note, I kept my kid home this morning because I just kind of wanted to break the routine of getting up every single day like freaking boot camp and getting into school. So I kept
be careful. If he's in a public school, they're gonna knock you for being a bad parent.
I don't look. I just did it one time. Right.
Oh, well, see, now you're on their radar.
No, I'm not on their radar.
Don't even get me started on public school, because I have such extreme loathing for our public school system.
I agree with you. And let me tell you, okay, I'll be straight up now, because now we're into the criticism of the public school system. They were going to have a lockdown drill at his school today.
What?
And I did not want him to participate in that.
Okay, describe for the uninformed masses what a lockdown is, because I know what it.
Basically, rehearsing for a Sandy Hook type event. That's what it is. So I did not want him to be a part of that, so we took off a few hours this morning, which was good because it also broke the rhythm and the cycle.
Do you remember diving under your desk when I remember when I was going to grade school?
Have that, yeah, absolutely.
The nuclear bomb drills.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was one of the kids that worked it out in my head early that if they were going to drop the bomb, literally, and I actually stood up and I said, well, couldn't we just watch it happen? And I remember my teacher, this was when I was in third grade. This was Mrs. Giraldi, and wherever you are, I want to kick you in your teeth, but I forgive you. How's that for paradoxical?
Everybody has a Mrs. Giraldi in their closet.
Yeah, she just kind of looked at me, and of course, she reported me, and I had to go sit in the principal's office. And that man, I swear, he did his best, and I didn't understand the humor behind it at that moment, but now I get it. When she explained to him that I caused dissension in the classroom because I didn't understand why we had to sit under our desks if they were dropping a bomb.
Right.
I'll never forget the look on this guy's face when she explained it to him, and she was livid. She was blithering because, the kids started asking questions, and I was adamant. I'm like, why do we have to sit under our desk? We're all going to be blown to bits.
Well, you never know. Maybe one of you little angels might make it through, and and the desk would support.
No, here's the thing. I wasn't allowed to watch television when I was growing up, with the exception of PBS. So I was raised on a healthy stream of Doctor Who, PBS and the BBC. So upstairs, downstairs, Doctor Who, and Monty Python.
Right.
So the Flying Circus is where I developed my understanding of humor, which is why a lot of people don't understand me, but that's okay. I also got to watch all the documentaries on Nova and those other programs, and I understood what it meant, what was going to happen should there be nuclear annihilation. Mittens, can you say nuclear annihilation? And I knew. And there was no sitting under your desk. There was no escaping the horrific reality of being blown to bits in 3 seconds.
Right. It's true. If you were the lucky one that survived, well, how long would you survive for, really?
Yeah, no, I don't call that lucky. No.
In California, we had earthquake drills, which were actually not a bad thing.
Well, yeah, I went to school in California. I went to grade school in California.
Well, you know that, the earthquake drill.
Oh, yeah.
So let's do a little official business. It looks like Clay is not going to show up, and I'm going to launch into the interview with Ian here soon. So let's do a little official business. Let's tell people kind of who you are, what you do, where you do it, and what you have coming up, all within 2 minutes. Go.
Boom. All right. I am Sarah Nash, the incredible cosmic hooker, cosmictriage.com. Hey, I do want to give a shout-out, though, to the Labyrinth Society. We're doing our Bidding for Good auction. April 1st through May 11th. Send in your awesome donations now. And by the way, the first 10 people who send in a donation worth $100 or more, and this can be, if you have a timeshare, and you want to give us a week, do it. If you have a restaurant, you want to, give out 2 free meals. I mean, it doesn't have to be tangible items like, scarves and hats and jewelry or things like that. I mean, it can actually be things. If you're also a psychic, or like you, Robert, how about you give us an astrological reading for somebody, and they get to donate on it. They get to bid on it, and so that's my big love right now, the Labyrinth Society. I'm a lifetime member, and I use the Labyrinth in a lot of my work, and I've developed a healing modality called Cosmic Triage based on, it's kind of a no bullshit, let's sit down, let's take a look at your soul plan, let's find out where you're going and why you're not getting where you need to be. And as a side gig, I also get to talk to the dearly departed. And I seem to have really excellent work with results with people who have committed suicide or died in violent deaths and bizarre circumstances. For some reason, I'm able to tap into that energy a little bit better than just, say, your Aunt Lulu, who, died in her sleep peacefully when she was 103.
Right.
So I think it has a lot to do with unfinished business, because I'm very good with that. I like to call myself a psychic intuitive life coach. I call myself the cosmic hooker because when I was 19, I was a hooker. I worked for a very pricey madam in Palm Springs, and then I worked for a psychic hotline for quite some time. I became one of their elite psychics, and my son said to me one afternoon, he said, "Mom, you're everybody's favorite call girl. You're the cosmic hooker." So, I've had quite an interesting journey to get from point A to point B, and we don't have enough time to discuss it now. But yeah, that's my story, and I'm sticking to it, and I'm looking forward to jamming with you each month. This is going to be good.
Friday of every month, about a half an hour, Sarah and I will hash it out and talk about stuff, and like we did with Cloud Atlas today, and see where it takes us.
Yeah.
All right. Well, listen, thank you for showing up, and you take care, and we'll see you on April 1st. We'll be a couple.
Looking forward to it.
Yeah.
All right. Bye now.
Bye. Take care. That's Sarah Nash, the Cosmic Hooker. Okay. Looks like Clay is not going to be here, so we'll probably reschedule him for Monday, and we'll talk about his music, which will actually be better. We'll have a bigger window to connect. Let me just set the stage for my next piece here. This is an interview I did yesterday with Ian Crane, Ian R. Crane. He's a researcher in England, and he had a background in the oil industry. That's where he comes out of. That's where he had his awakening. And he has a website, ianrcrane.com. You can find out a lot more about him. And he came to me through Darren Williams. And I'm going to play the interview that we did yesterday. It's about an hour and 20 minutes. So I think you'll enjoy it. It's a pretty lively discussion. And when I come back, if we have any time, and if Clay's around, maybe we'll talk to him. If not, I'll definitely play some of his music. It's really, really cool music. So let's get into this. This is me and Ian Crane from yesterday talking about the oil industry, corporate psychopathology, the Pope, and fracking. I'll be back in about an hour and 20 minutes. Enjoy the conversation. It's a good one. So our next guest is one of England's really cutting-edge alternative information and news researchers, and was brought to my attention by Darren Williams. I'm really, really glad that he brought Ian right to the forefront of my consciousness so I can begin to get into his work. This is Ian Crane, all the way from England. Hello, Ian. How are you doing today?
Hey, Robert. I'm real good, thanks, and thanks for the invitation to join you today.
That's my pleasure. One of the things that I really I went to your website. I checked out a lot of your information. You and I seem to be, right there on a lot of different subjects and topics. So I know that you and I can have a pretty fluid conversation. But one of the things that I really appreciated about you and your work and your website is that it's no nonsense. You don't pull any punches. You get right to the facts. You're a follow the money guy, but in a time where money isn't everything, you're also able to make these leaps in terms of how you see things unfolding on the global scene. And what I wanted to ask you, Ian, is how did everybody has their kind of truth moment, their epiphany moment. When did that happen for you, and how did that change your life? And all of a sudden you said, this is really what I need my life to be about.
Okay. Well, it wasn't exactly all of a sudden, but because I was a slow learner. But back in 1990, I was working in the oilfield services industry. I was working with a company called Schlumberger, or as it's known in the US, Schlumberger. And I was based in Dubai and had responsibility for resources in the Middle East. And in the October of 1990, word came down the chain of command that we needed to start thinking about the resources that we would need to deal with a firefighting operation in Kuwait. And when I asked the question, I was told, well, the intelligence is that if Saddam, or if and when Saddam is forced out of Kuwait, then he's going to set all the wells alight. And I said, well, that's really interesting. Why would he do that? And obviously the response came back, well, just to be an asshole, basically.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, when I went into Kuwait, which was about 5 months later, it was late March of 1991, and I was one of the first civilians to go into Kuwait after the cessation of hostilities. And I went in with some of my colleagues, one from Halliburton and one from each of the 4 appointed firefighting companies, which were Boots and Coots, Wild Well Control, Safety Boss, and Red Adair, although Red Adair himself never actually set foot in Kuwait. But we were there to look at the logistics for dealing with a firefighting exercise, the like of which, of course, we'd never seen on the planet, and to be frank, I hope to God we never see again. But as we were driving around the southern oil fields, it became, apparent that the official version of events, i.e. that the retreating Iraqi forces set light to the wells, wasn't supported by the physical evidence. And the physical evidence that I saw in the southern oil fields in particular was young Iraqi conscripts in their defensive foxholes, basically with bullet holes in the backs of their necks. So to believe the official version of events, you'd have to believe that they basically set the well alight and then jumped back in their foxholes and then shot themselves in the backs of the neck. So I flagged up my incredulity to the officer that had been assigned to escort us and drive us around the southern oil fields, and he was sort of somewhat embarrassed. Well, a couple of days later, I was approached by a guy who was dressed in battle fatigues with no markings on whatsoever, no name tag. I mean, very, very unusual. But he knew who I was, and he walked straight over to me, and he said, "You're Ian Crane, and I've been hearing you've been casting some aspersion about who set them wells alight." And I mean, that short statement obviously was indelibly printed on my brain from that moment. And I didn't say anything, and he just said, "Boy," he said, "that's the kind of thinking that could get you into a whole lot of trouble, and you best be keeping your mouth shut." And then as he turned to walk away, he looked over his shoulder and with sort of a smirk on his face said, "What the fuck's the matter, Ian? Aren't we paying you enough?" Well, here I am almost exactly 22 years later, telling the story fairly glibly. But let me tell you, at the time, I was absolutely crapping myself.
Yeah.
Because I thought, my God, if these guys think I'm going to blow the whistle, what are they going to do? But I don't think I slept too well for the next couple of nights, or actually until I got back into Dubai. But after I got back to Dubai, something quite strange occurred, because I got a phone call from the chief executive officer of Schlumberger, who I had met a few years previously, but it was quite unusual. I mean, it never happened before and it never happened since. And I was 3 levels of management removed from the CEO. And he called me and he said, "So Ian, how's it going?" And I said, "Yeah, it's good. Ewan." He said, "How was Kuwait?" So I gave him a brief rundown of the situation in Kuwait. And then what he said was really very interesting. He said, "Now Ian," he said, "listen very carefully. Is everything okay?" And I hesitated and I said, "Yes, Ewan, everything is okay." And he said, no, I want to be absolutely certain. Is everything okay? You're comfortable with everything and there's no issues? And I said, I realized what was going on here. And I said, look, we're just going to get on with the job and do what needs to be done. And obviously I realized that somebody in the chain of command had obviously contacted him and probably said something along the lines of, how well do you know this guy Crane?
Mm-hmm.
And, can you rely on him to, basically toe the party line? And he probably said, yeah, I've met Ian once and, we got on well, blah, blah, blah. And, but I'll give him a call. And anyway, obviously I heard nothing more. But I got on with the job, and you've got to take into account, this is, before the internet. I mean, this is 1991.
Right.
So there was no possibility of sharing this or, putting out the feelers to see whether there was any, information out there that might help corroborate my opinions. And consequently, I had to live with it for the next sort of 5-6 years. Then I came over to the US. I took an assignment in the US, based in Houston, Texas. I got the opportunity to, experience the US oil industry firsthand. And while I was in the US, I took the opportunity to do a lot more research. And of course, I came to some very, very significant realizations, and that was that everything I thought I knew was fundamentally wrong. And I basically decided that I was now 40 in 1996. I was 40. Mm-hmm. And I decided that I wasn't going to be spending the next 20 years of my life doing what I'd been doing for the previous 20 years. And it still took me a couple of years to extricate myself from Schlumberger. I finally left in late 1988 after nearly, just over 19 years. And I went and played golf for a year because I really had to, obviously get...
Well, you have some PTSD, it sounds like, on some level.
Well, I guess that was it. And, I was dealing with it internally, and I had no idea where I was going to go, but I knew I didn't want to be a participant in the oil industry. 10 years previously, I was as glib as anybody else working in the oil industry. And I can remember actually talking to a young recruit who was expressing his almost incredulity that Schlumberger was working in both Iran and Iraq. And, of course, this was at the time when they were knocking 7 barrels of hell out of each other, primarily thanks to both being supported by the U.S.
Right.
The U.S. was making sure that both of them were appropriately tooled up, to keep each other occupied.
Right.
And I can remember glibly saying, look, it's not our job to get involved in global politics. That's another reality. Our job is simply to get the hydrocarbons out of the ground, and provide the services to whomever the customer is. But of course, here I was now in 1998, realizing, the magnitude of the naivety of that statement. But I mean, it still holds fairly, much today that if you're working in this industry, you literally have to operate in the realm of cognitive dissonance. Mm-hmm. You literally have to put the blindfold on and basically just shut the fuck up, and get on with whatever it is that your paymasters demand you to do. And nobody understands the seduction and the allure of the corporate arena more than me. I mean, I was well rewarded, had a nice lifestyle, but, there comes a point when, basically, you literally have to say, okay, my investment in the physical empirical material realm is so great, I am going to still keep my head in the sand, or you're going to, if you like, go through that process of self-actualization and say, you know what, I'm actually not going to be a player in this. I'm going to step outside. And consequently, although I did get lured back into the corporate world briefly in 1999, I only stayed there for about 18 months. And then I knew that was it. My days in the corporate world were over. And by this point, I was absolutely focused on my re-education. And I was looking at a number of different angles. I mean, very much on the geopolitical side. I was re-educating myself, certainly on 20th century geopolitics, and having a completely new comprehension of how the 20th century had been manipulated by the sort of global corporatists. Mm-hmm. And also I was exploring, if you like, the non-material realms. I'd always been fascinated by ancient cultures, ancient civilizations, and of course being based in the Middle East and having the opportunity to explore around Egypt was also fascinating. And so, I was very much following, if you like, a multiple relearning path here. Then in 2000 and 2001, I was actually in Central America. I was actually researching Mayan mythology and cosmology in Central America. But I was also obviously very well aware of what was going on in the US and the complete and utter BS of the hanging chads, mm-hmm. and the manipulation of the 2000 election, when Bush was awarded the presidency over Al Gore by the Supreme Court ruling in his favor. So, this was, of course, an abomination of the supposed democratic process.
Mm-hmm.
But then once Bush was sworn in and he went back to Crawford, Texas, and as time wore on, it was very apparent that Bush had no interest in really playing the role of U.S. president. I mean, the U.S. president, as you and most listeners in the U.S. are probably aware, but maybe people outside the U.S. aren't aware, that the U.S. does not actually have very much to do in terms of the domestic political scene. That's really down to the governors of the state.
Right.
So, the U.S. president is, if you like, almost free and clear to pursue this role of, the senior world leader, which of course means the representative of the global banksters.
Right.
But Bush, of course, went down to Crawford. I think he only spent about 19 days in Washington in total, and the rest of the time he was just holed up in Crawford or playing golf. And I, was obviously aware of some of the extreme right-wing think tank documents of the neocons, and in particular, I guess it was probably about January or February of 2001, I became aware of the documents published by the group who called themselves, what was it?
AEI or Brookings?
No, this was the Rebuilding America's Defenses document.
Oh, okay. PNAC, Project for New American Century. Right. A clear break.
Published in September of 2000.
Right, yeah, important. That's a very important piece. It's huge. It's a linchpin piece, actually.
Totally. And because I had also read Zbigniew Brzezinski's Grand Chessboard, and I realized that the Project for a New American Century report, Rebuilding America's Defenses, had taken a lot of Brzezinski's work and effectively, in some cases, literally lifted whole chunks out of it and just put it into the report. And, it became obvious to me that, Bush and Cheney in particular, and Cheney, of course, really was the senior of the two,
mm-hmm.
that these guys were going to create an opportunity to effectively implement the hegemony that was a stated requirement of the neocons. And, of course, the neocons had actually written to Clinton in 1998, led by Rumsfeld, asking him, almost demanding, actually, that he invade Iraq. And, of course, Clinton effectively just chose to ignore them. But now, there were 27 signatories, I think it was, to the PNAC document. And 10 of them basically went straight into George W. Bush's government. So they were in office certainly by early February of 2001. And so while I was in Central America, I was telling everybody who would listen that basically the U.S. was setting something up here, that would have such an impact on the world community that it would almost create a completely new version of reality. Now, I had no idea what it was going to be. And in fact, I thought it might have been, if you can cast your mind back, there was an incident where a U.S. spy plane collided with a Chinese fighter
mm-hmm.
in March of 2001. And I thought that might be the incident, but of course the U.S. Economy is so reliant on produce from China that the industrialists and the banks basically said, no, don't piss off the Chinese, just apologize and we'll get the plane back. But of course they did get the plane back, but not until after it had been stripped of all avionics by the Chinese.
Right, yeah, absolutely.
But anyway, so roll the clock forward. We had a fairly quiet summer through 2001, and then, of course, everyone remembers where they were, and if they were alive just as they do in 1963, when Kennedy was driving around Dealey Plaza, everybody remembers what they were doing that morning of September the 11th, 2001. And I was in Belize. I was in a little place called Placencia. I went to the bar that was my usual breakfast jaunt. It was called the Purple Space Monkey in Placencia. It's a beautiful place, just a few yards back from the beach. And I was watching CNN, along with everybody else, and watching this thing unfold. And I hate to admit it, but when the first tower fell, which of course was the second tower, it was World Trade Center 2, which collapsed about 45 minutes after being supposedly hit by a plane. And when that tower collapsed, I jumped up from where I was sitting, and I clapped my hands. I said, this is it. This is exactly the event I've been talking about. Now, and then, of course, when a few hours later, or not even a few hours, almost immediately, the news reports started blaming it on Osama bin Laden. I said, look, the script has already been prepared. Now, I came back from Belize to the UK. It was the first time I'd really lived in the UK for over a decade. And I decided that I was going to focus my efforts on researching the events of 9/11. And even to this day, I probably still have one of the most remarkable and complete repositories of photographic and video information from that day, because I was collecting it right from the get-go.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it still took me 7 months, because I decided that I was going to do this as thoroughly and as scientifically as I possibly could. And it took me 7 months until April of 2002 to be absolutely convinced, beyond any shadow of doubt, that the events of 9/11 were not as per the official version of events. Even to this day, I don't profess to know exactly what did happen, but I know what didn't happen.
Right.
And consequently, I actually took it out onto the road, and I gave my very first public presentation on the events of 9/11 in January of 2003 to a massive audience of 3 people.
Wow. That's mind-blowing. Where was this?
That was in a place called Exeter in the southwest of England.
Mm-hmm.
And, what is actually very interesting...
How many of those 3 people, by the way, were intelligence? Maybe one out of the 3?
Actually, none of them.
Okay.
The UK intelligence services, to the best of my knowledge, for all I know, they may come along to many events, but to the best of my knowledge, they've only been present evidently present at one event. And that was when I gave a talk on the events of the London bombings.
Uh-huh.
And I gave the presentation I was invited to give a presentation by a Muslim group in a Muslim community in a place called Bradford in the north of England. And the room was absolutely jam-packed, probably about 300 people crammed into the room. The vast majority of whom were Muslim. There were a few people from the British community, but there were two people sat right in the middle with their arms folded in grey suits, and their facial expression didn't change the whole way through. And I think that they were primarily there to see if I was going to incite any reaction. And of course, I go completely the opposite. I made it very, very clear to this Muslim community that, obviously there is absolutely no way that they should react with violence. That is what the establishment wants.
Yeah.
They want an excuse to come back with violence.
Yeah, the way to pounce.
This will not be, the battle that we're in will not be won through violence.
No.
We've got to come up with completely new strategies. But come back to the 3 people. What is very interesting is every one of those 3 people, they'd all come along separately and independently. And every one of those 3 people acknowledged that they'd simply come along to see who this nutter was, who thought that 9/11 was something other than 19 Muslims wielding plastic box cutters.
Right.
But obviously it was quite an intimate evening, with just the 3 people. And they gave me the time of day. And, they listened to everything that I presented. And every one of them, at the end of the evening, acknowledged that I had certainly given them something to think about.
Right.
Now, 5 years later, every one of those was an activist. Every one of those 3 people was an activist. Not on 9/11, but on different things. But every one of them acknowledges that it was coming along to that evening that actually triggered their own curiosity. And, of course, once they started to look at this, then... obviously they quickly went into other areas. And one of those individuals is actually in jail right now because they became an alternative health practitioner, and they made the phenomenal error of making a public statement that they cured somebody of cancer. And that is something you just don't do in the UK.
You probably couldn't even do it. You shouldn't do it here.
Yeah.
That's touchy territory. Ian, I just want to go back in time just a little bit in your wonderful kind of prologue here. I wanted just to ask you a little bit about corporate culture, because I'm fascinated by the subject and topic of psychopathology, which exists at an almost viral level in the corporate environment. And your cognitive dissonant moment strikes me as being really interesting, because it feels to me, and maybe you can speak to this, that in the corporate structure, at a high level, you have kind of a voracious, predatory, psychopathological sort of elite that are moving things along. And then as you go down the pyramid, ultimately you wind up with people in this kind of cognitive dissonant flux where they have moments of conscience, and yet they want to bury their head in the sand in order to either make their payments or have the perks or whatever those things are. And at that point in time, they begin to experience aberrant behavior, and they'll do things that are self-destructive, drink, have affairs, and their lives ultimately become shit unless they go full-blown psychopath, in which case they're rewarded. What was your experience like around this, and what were some of the things that you witnessed in that environment that kind of reflected the reality that I'm talking about?
No, I mean, you pretty much summarized it there. I mean, the reality is that it is extremely difficult, not impossible, but extremely difficult to become a chief executive officer or an officer of a Fortune 500 company unless, basically, you have the capacity to portray socio- and psychopathic tendencies. I mean, the reality is you cannot fulfill your corporate function if you have too much regard for the individuals, either in your organization or outside the organization. Now, are these people natural socio-psychopaths? In many cases, no. But the allure of the material rewards are so great that they effectively suppress their true self.
Yeah.
And that, you're absolutely right. That is why many do indeed turn to drink and drugs, screwing around. I mean, as you know yourself, the business in Houston and many other U.S. cities, particularly in the oil industry, but not exclusively so, is done in the gentlemen's clubs.
Yeah.
I mean, Rick's in Houston, just off Westheim, or Richmond. Rick's just off Richmond. Treasures, Colorado Club. These are the places where the business is done, and basically, people in the senior level in the corporate world, they go there, because basically there's a distraction almost that keeps their mind off of the potential effects and implications of the decisions that they're making. Right. So there's no question. There's absolutely no question that I think at some point in everybody's career, they have a very, very difficult choice to make. And of course, in most people's cases, particularly in the male of the species, it will occur somewhere around about the age of 40. In the indigenous cultures, this is regarded as the midlife opportunity. Yeah. It's the opportunity to reflect on everything you thought you knew. In Western society, we dismiss it as the midlife crisis. And, you give somebody a slap. I mean, you see it in the corporate world because basically it manifests as the guys going out and buying their Harley or buying their Corvette, starting to try and convince themselves that, they're not really entering the second half of their time on this mortal coil. But there are many, many people who, reach the same sort of point that I did, maybe not in. They don't necessarily have the same sort of brutal awakening that I did in Kuwait. But there's people who say, hang on a second, there's got to be more to life than doing what I'm doing in the corporate world. And by the way, I mean, it's enhanced in corporatocracy today because I remember reading an interview with Lloyd Blankfein in 2009 where he made the statement that testosterone was the drug of choice in Goldman Sachs.
Mm-hmm.
Now, at the time, I thought he was, just sort of, it was a euphemism. And then I discovered later that, actually people were taking testosterone. The men and the women working in Goldman Sachs were taking the testosterone. And of course, this effectively, an overdose of testosterone, we know exactly what effect that has. And it's suppressing people's true humanity. Mm-hmm. And it's enabling the ego to totally dominate. And of course, the ego will do whatever it thinks it needs to do to not only maintain but enhance its material rewards, within the corporate realm.
Right, and aided and abetted by testosterone creates kind of a monstrous scenario for not just them but for the rest of us.
Exactly, and of course, in many cases, and you and I both know that particularly in southern Texas, there's other drugs that also play the role. I mean, the usage of particularly cocaine,
right,
is phenomenal because these guys are going to the clubs. I mean, I must confess that I used to joke that it was a bloody good job that the club shut at 2.
Right. Yeah.
Because at least that way I could go home and get 4 or 5 hours sleep.
Right.
If I was doing business in Chicago where the club shut at 4, life was a lot tougher because, as you know, once you get into that mode, you ain't going anywhere until you're kicked out.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. And if you want, and you're not going to be doing business at Starbucks or the library, so this is where it's going down, and you got to play the game.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, if you want to participate at this level, you got to play the game.
Yeah.
So, I'm not obviously, I'm not suggesting that everybody is an extreme socio-psychopath in the same way as I would label Tony Blair with that moniker. But the reality is that we've got people who are taking decisions, and they know damn well that those decisions will have a negative impact on the quality of life of people either within their organizations or in the outside world. And I mean, one of the great ironies, of course, is that people who work for these corporations, they think that the corporation is loyal to them.
Right.
And of course, this is a complete and utter delusion.
Yeah.
The corporation has no loyalty to the individual whatsoever. You might think you're well rewarded, you might think you're being well taken care of, and you might think that you actually have a role to play in the organisation. But the reality is that that is only the case whilst you are towing the party line. The moment you step out of line, I mean, in Goldman Sachs, the moment that you show that you're not prepared to work 18-hour days, then you are no longer considered to be a good soldier,
right? And
you will be out on your rear at the first opportunity. And of course, in the prevailing economic climate over the last 4 or 5 years, more and more people have learned that to their absolute cost, that there is no loyalty. And the tragedy of this is that those who do remain on the corporate payroll have prostituted themselves to an even greater level because of the fear that's created, that unless they do what is required, and I love this phrase, not really, of course, but shareholder value.
Right.
Shareholder value, which of course is a euphemism for doing whatever it takes, Enron style almost, to ensure that the share price is
remain high,
maintained, regardless of what it's at. And of course the fraud. I mean, Enron and WorldCom and
Peregrine and all these other companies.
And all these, I mean, this is just the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah.
Okay, these were the ones where it maybe went to extremes, but the bottom line is all of these companies are committing fraud, all under the guise of shareholder value.
Yeah. No, it's the prevailing climate. I'm an astrologer. this is completely in resonance with Pluto and Capricorn, which came in 2009. And you can see just prior to Pluto and Capricorn, we had the financial collapse here in the States, the bailout, and everything as a result of it has been the rise of the corporatocracy. The other thing, too, Ian, is that within the corporate climate, you'll have people who will have the moment of conscience. They'll indulge in the aberrant behavior, even though they're cognitively dissonant or impaired on that level, but they'll rationalize themselves and they'll say, well, if I don't do this, somebody else will. Somebody else will come up from behind me and do exactly what I'm doing, so it doesn't matter if I do it or somebody else does it, right?
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, and of course there are other pressures as well. I mean, the family pressures. You know, my wife, when I told her that, you know, I was seriously thinking of leaving the oil industry, I mean, she literally went white. You know, because I think she suddenly, you know, saw her lifestyle just slipping away from her.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I'm not suggesting that this was the only issue. Of course, you know, there were others as well. But, you know, in fact, we ended up getting divorced in Houston under Texas law. You know, we separated in April 98, and we finally divorced in September of 98. And, you know, a big part of that was the fact that I was, well, 100% engaging in the extremes within the oil industry and within Houston and the U.S. Corporate culture. But she was prepared to tolerate that, if you like, whilst she was benefiting from the material rewards.
Right.
So, you know, we lived in a nice house in a nice area on Lakeside, just outside the Beltway, just off north of Westheimer. I mean, it was beautiful. It was a lovely, lovely lifestyle. But you know, with all that dissipating, then you know, there was the end of my marriage. Like I said, there were other factors as well. I'm not pinning it all on that. But basically, I mean, I was behaving like a complete arsehole, really, because I was throwing myself into this culture. But I wasn't totally comfortable. I mean, sure, I was getting the physical stimulus and everything that goes with it, but I wasn't comfortable. And I mean, at a deep level, I knew that there was way more to life than this. And you know, this was just if you like, a temporary aberration. And it was, you know, part of the process. But I absolutely appreciate how difficult it is for people to let go.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I had my own version of that in my own life. Now that you have broached the subject here, I mean, for me, it was in 2007. It was my last kind of corporate stint, and I was working for a company that was trying to keep its share price up, and it was a .com. And it had just been funded about a year and a half before that. They did an IPO for about $45 million, and it was in the music business. That's where I was coming from.
Right.
And I saw some things that were just, it was because I had been in the music business for a while. I was in a soft.com before that, 5 years, and didn't have nearly the nightmarish experiences that a lot of people in the corporate world do, although I saw it from kind of an angle. But it was like I said, it was fairly soft and benign. But this one was much different because there was a huge amount of pressure on the CEO, you know, to meet the street and all that stuff.
Right.
And I remember him, you know, really grinding me to do a deal and to sign a label that I did not feel was on the up and up, and was actually kind of a crook. And he needed an announcement. He needed to bring something to the street. And so I did this deal, and sure enough, the guy, as soon as he got into the deal, he was doing everything he could to get out of the deal once he got his advance money. And he was in England, and I was in the States. And I was then told, just get this thing done. Fix it, fix it, fix it. I flew to England. I took him out to a $300 dinner in Notting Hill. You know, I did all these things. And at the end of the day, all he wanted to do was just rip us off. And I couldn't fix it. And that's when I got thrown under the bus. And that was my first experience in really hardcore kind of corporate politics. The guy that threw me under the bus was the guy that told me to do the deal. And he was just covering his ass.
Yeah.
But as this was going on, I was also I've been on this express for quite a while in my life, and in fact, my life was different. I was on the outside until I was 40, and then I went on the inside. So after I was done playing on the inside, I came back out again and kind of resumed my work, for lack of a better term, around it. And what happened? My marriage and the sanctity of my marriage got threatened. Why? Because I refused to go back into that environment again that I had experienced. And by the way, I was starting to make inroads with my website and connect with people, and it was much more vital and aware. And my ex-wife really didn't want to have anything to do with that, not only from a financial standpoint, but also from a standpoint where it made her feel insecure and unsafe. Right. I got to tell you, Ian, I think this is one of the biggest challenges as a culture that we face, as a planet that we face, because the awakening process isn't just one person in the family. It should be theoretically a familial experience. But because the male is out there looking at the periphery, finding out theoretically what the mastodon or the saber-toothed tiger in the environment is, and to protect the family from that, that's our role. And we live in a society now where those threats are much more, I would call them ephemeral, but they're not as visceral. And so we've had some real challenges in terms of rewiring how we do this and how it impacts our most important relationships.
Absolutely. And I mean, I know that, everyone who's listening to this, if they haven't been through it themselves, they know someone that has. Because, over the last, decade, probably even a bit longer, but certainly over the last decade, then, relationships have been seriously tested as one or other partner starts to take a different path. And, I mean, I have a number of friends. I mean, one guy in particular, a lovely guy. I mean, he works in the corporate world, but he woke up to this about probably about 6 years ago. He actually invited me to do a series of talks, and over the last few years, I mean, he's become increasingly involved. But his wife is also a senior manager within another corporation. And in addition, I mean, they have 4 kids. And basically, my friend now has to work on the basis that he cannot broach any alternative issue inside the family home.
That's hard.
I mean, if I want to speak to him, I have to text him and then leave it for him to call me, as and when he's got an opportunity. And, I mean, although that's probably the most extreme case, but he's decided that, obviously he does want to keep the family together. It is a priority. And so, he just has to compromise his worldview within the family home and, and pretend that he's just still locked into the physical, empirical, material realm and, there's no other issue. And it's very, very difficult.
Yeah. That brings to mind the whole they live scenario, And, interesting territory. So today, one of the reasons why I wanted to bring you on the show was because today is the day the Pope is resigning. And he's stepping down today. Mm-hmm. He's going into the witness protection program.
Yeah.
And we wanted to talk a little bit about that. I'm wondering kind of where you are with this and what kind of information you've been able to gather and some code you've been able to crack. What's happening with the bishop in England and any of the sort of related pedophile and sex scandals around the Pope, and where do you think this is all going?
Well, I mean, obviously, everything is inextricably interlinked, and this has been building up for a while, and of course, there were a hell of a lot of people who had their hopes, if you like, focused on December 21st last year.
Mm-hmm.
And, there were many of us out there. I mean, I was on record. I mean, it's in my DVD. And I was saying that, look, anybody who has such an existential commitment to something significant occurring on December 21st is going to be disappointed. Well, I said there was a 99.9% chance they were going to be disappointed because
right.
you never rule out the possibility that something might just occur. But the likelihood was very, very slim. And I even suggested that some people would wake up on December 22nd and just keel over and die, because they had such an existential attachment to something happening on that date that they would no longer be able to live with themselves. But there's no question that we were building up to something, and I presented that that date, if you like, as perhaps a fulcrum, as the tipping point at which the balance started to change. Mm-hmm. And I think that this is what is happening right now. I mean, I just signed off on a newsletter that I put out. And my final paragraph, and it's not exactly all encapsulating, but I said the Pope may have resigned, the Vatican may be about to elect the final pontiff, Petra Romanus, more of which later, the US and the Euro may be on the brink of collapse, the US and Israel may be about to launch an attack on Iran, Italy may be about to have a coalition government led by a comedian and a sexually hyperactive septuagenarian, the Bulgarian government may have resigned, but here in the UK, and then I discussed something else. But the reality is that there is so much that is falling down. And of course, when we look at the global financial arena, which is very much connected with what's going on in the Vatican right now, but if we look at the global financial arena, the collapse started in 2007. In the US, actually, you can trace it back to the first signs of the problems with the subprime mortgage rate.
Yep.
And that was actually 2006. In the UK, the first sign was August 2007 with the collapse of the Northern Rock Bank. And you can actually trace the collapse of the property market, the domestic property market, to the middle weekend in October of 2007. So here we are, almost halfway through the sixth year of the global financial collapse. And what do we see changing? Nothing. Basically, we simply see the Federal Reserve and all the other central banks trying to prop up the economies by literally throwing money that doesn't exist into the equation. And that's why we've seen the price of gold, ramp up from barely a couple $100 at the turn of the century.
That's right.
To $1,650. Of course, it went up to $1,900 an ounce in the middle of 2011.
Yeah.
But since then, by the way, that's called voluntary confiscation. We encourage people to sell it back to the bank.
Exactly. Yeah.
But it's been hovering around about the 1,650 marker or so for the past 2.5 years. But the reality is that gold is obviously being artificially held down because they don't want people taking their money out of the stock market and buying into the gold. Right. But the bottom line is that we're not seeing any fundamental change. And the great tragedy, of course, is that the absolute model of how an economy should be structured exists within the US, and that's in North Dakota. North Dakota is the only state in the US that isn't part of the Federal Reserve. Interesting. And consequently, hardly anybody in North America knows that. Hardly anybody in the world is aware of it. But since 1922, I believe it is, North Dakota has effectively been operating outside of the Federal Reserve because back in the days shortly after the establishment of the Federal Reserve in December 22nd, 1913, the then governor of North Dakota was astute and smart enough to realize what would happen to the North Dakotan economy if they signed in to the Federal Reserve. So North Dakota introduced legislation taking North Dakota out of the Federal Reserve Act. And We don't have the time really to go into detail of North Dakota's economy, but I mean, I would really encourage people, those who are curious anyway, to go and do a little bit of research about how North Dakota functions, because North Dakota is the only state in North America right now that isn't bankrupt.
That is fascinating. Wasn't Ezra Pound from North Dakota?
I don't know. That's a very interesting question.
I think Ezra Pound was raised in North Dakota, if I'm not mistaken. Not that there's any correlation between the two, but it's interesting.
Well, North Dakota, of course, is ostensibly, even today, is ostensibly still a state of Norwegian descendants. You know, it was certainly Scandinavians anyway. And, you know, they never really considered themselves as, if you like, Americans. You know, North Dakota was their little piece of heaven, you know, away from Scandinavia.
Mm-hmm.
But they were smart enough, you know, to potentially realize the magnitude of the impact of signing into the Federal Reserve. And, of course, they were absolutely right.
Yeah.
So the model exists in North Dakota. Iceland, an economy that totally tanked just a little over 4 years ago. Totally tanked. I mean, it was absolutely shot. And yet it is the only economy in the developed world that is in growth mode.
And they have nothing. I mean, the Icelanders have fish, steam, and Bjork, right?
Yeah, and aluminium smelting.
Okay, the thing you bring up about Iceland, and I've talked about this with people, and I think, by the way, if you're keeping score at home, Ezra Pound, Idaho, not North Dakota. One of the things that I think Iceland has in common with what you just shared about North Dakota, I hate to say this, but they have a homogeneous kind of base that they can make decisions from, and they're not divided and conquered, Ian.
That's true. That is absolutely true. I mean, the Icelandic population is effectively still, dare I say it, pure. You know, it hasn't been compromised like the rest of Western Europe with immigration. And of course, you know, the US knows more about immigration than probably any other nation in the world, probably other than Israel. But consequently, you're right. It is a homogeneous culture. And when the economy collapsed, you know, the Icelandic people realized that they had been, how should I say, remiss in simply reaping or believing that they were reaping the benefits from their bankers literally turning the country in what was reportedly the 5th highest personal income on the planet in 2006. And there was no real questions being asked as to how they managed to achieve this in the space of about 8 years. And in the space of 30 years, I mean, Iceland was regarded as, you know, almost a third world country in the 1970s. And, of course, the reality is that a few of the fishermen had gone into finance, and because they weren't constrained by previous experience, you know, they come up with these incredibly creative ways of packaging various sort of financial products together and literally appearing to make out like bandits. But, of course, it was all smoke and mirrors.
Was that the i-share or i-save? Was it i-share or i-save? Was that what you're talking about?
Well, that actually, i-save was a desperate attempt to recover some degree of cash liquidity. Because in 2006, it was very apparent to the people on the inside of the Icelandic bank that they were totally screwed. They had a negative cash flow, and they desperately needed an injection of cash. And so they came up with this idea to create these online banks targeted at the UK and then subsequently the Netherlands, offering higher than high street banks interest rates. And of course, I mean, literally, I think within the first few months, something like about 300,000 people in the UK moved their accounts from the high street bank into Iceland. So this gave the Icelandic banks this sort of short reprieve because they had this influx of cash.
Right.
It was only a short reprieve because, like I said, the whole thing was basically smoke and mirrors.
Yeah.
And it was a Ponzi scheme. And by late 2007, 2008, 2008, it was very apparent that it was totally unsustainable. And when it did collapse, I mean, it was over the edge of a cliff. Those on the inside track obviously had some warning, but the vast majority of people, knew nothing until literally sort of, they woke up one morning and basically they couldn't get anything out of the bank because there was nothing there. But the government collapsed, and the sitting government did actually sort of take some money from the IMF in the short term just to sort of, keep the company moving. But when they had their election, the sitting government was effectively thrown out, and the vast majority of MPs that were members of the new parliament that were elected were coming into parliament for the first time. But one of the interesting factors here, which very few people are aware of, is that the vast majority of MPs that were elected were women. And the attitude in Iceland basically was that the men fucked it up, and it was going to take the women to put it right. And actually, there's a hell of a lot of truth in that. Because the women readily acknowledged that they knew nothing about banking, but neither were they prepared to, listen to the BS that the IMF were putting forward about the solutions that they needed to implement. So, they literally started from scratch, building their economy from scratch, and establishing their own bank. So Iceland today is outside of the central banking system, much to the chagrin of the Rothschilds. So don't be at all surprised if you start reading in the American press in a couple of years' time or so that Iceland is suspected of having weapons of mass destruction.
Yeah, all of their volcanoes and their thermal pools will be designated some kind of natural terror weapon. So they'll have to like depopulate Iceland just so nobody sticks any devices underneath all of those volcanoes, right?
Well, we won't even get on to heart, but the reality is that yes, it was hard, and it's still hard, and not everybody is euphoric about the way that the women have managed Iceland's recovery. But it was never going to be easy when basically you were so deep in the abyss. But in the short term, you just had to cling for any foothold or handhold, but without resorting to the IMF.
It was on their terms. It was on their terms.
It was on their terms, absolutely.
Yeah.
And so now we've got basically the U.S. obviously totally enslaved to the Federal Reserve, with the exception of Dakota. We've got the U.S. Military spend accounting for 57% of GDP. I mean, this is obscene. This is absolutely obscene. And of course, the American military is not the American military. It is effectively the private militia of the global corporatists.
That's right.
Bankers.
Yeah.
And operating under the guise of
democracy.
The nationality. It's absurd.
Yeah.
But the bottom line is that more and more people are waking up to the magnitude of the financial fraud. 5 years ago, I can remember asking in a presentation how many people had heard of the term fractional reserve banking, and a few hands would go up. And then I would ask how many people could actually come up to the front and give a 5-minute explanation, a simple explanation on the machinations of fractional reserve banking, and of course nobody would put their hands up. But today when I do that, when I ask how many people have heard the term fractional reserve banking, it's 90+% of people in the room will put their hands up.
Amazing.
And then I ask how many people can give a 5-minute version of fractional reserve banking, and probably about 10 to 15% of the people in the room will put their hands up. Now, this is mega. I mean, because once people understand the magnitude of the fraud and the methodology by which this fraud is being perpetrated, i.e. that the banks have a license to effectively print money and then charge interest on it, then people start to realize that they're just having the piss taken out. Yeah.
I mean, once you realize, I mean, it's so insane the concept of essentially printing paper and then selling it back to you with interest.
Yeah.
That it's almost too much for the mind to handle. But once you handle it, you're just like, it's the biggest scam ever on the planet.
Well, and the U.S. is bankrupt.
Yeah.
As are many, many other countries. I mean, the U.S. is bankrupt. That's the bottom line, because all of the federal taxes that are collected aren't enough to pay the interest on the U.S. debt to the private bankers. And of course, I mean, some people still have real difficulty getting their heads around the fact that the Federal Reserve has nothing at all to do with the U.S. government.
Right.
The Federal Reserve stands above the U.S. government.
Yeah.
There's nothing federal about the Federal Reserve. It's no more federal than Federal Express.
Right.
And it's because the power of the issuance of money has been handed over to these private bankers. Then the U.S. government has to go cap in hand to the Federal Reserve to borrow more money. But it's a no-brainer, because Bernanke and all of his predecessors just keep throwing money into the economy. Because they know damn well that they're going to be clawing back not just the interest, but I mean, this is how they strip the wealth from a country, because obviously they want repayment of both the capital and the interest. And when it can't be repaid in cash, then they take it in assets. So, the reality is that the world is effectively owned by the private banks or those whom they work on behalf of. And, and what we have inextricably mixed up in all of this, of course, is the Vatican Bank. And the Vatican Bank first perhaps broke into the news, what would it be, lost track of time now, gosh, whenever Pope, the first Pope, John Paul, was elected, because he knew of the magnitude of the problems with the Vatican Bank. Sorry, I lost my microphone. There we go. The first Pope, John Paul, knew of the magnitude of the fraud that was being perpetrated by the Vatican Bank in conjunction with Banco Ambrosiano. And so he decreed that there should be an investigation. And, of course, he was murdered 33 days later.
33 days later. Amazing. And he was also, I think, looking at the Freemasonic connection. Is that right, too, as well?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And the Italian Masonic group was known as P2,
right.
Propaganda Duo. And he was determined. I mean, he was a quiet man. He wasn't Italian, but he was a quiet man. And what he did is he kept his counsel, but he was extremely astute. And when he came into the office of Pope, he was determined to root out all of this corruption and get the Catholic Church back on the track, obviously, that he believed it should be on. But, of course, vested interests took care of that, and he was murdered. Probably one of the best investigative books written on the subject is written by a guy called David Yallop.
Okay.
And it's a superb book, and I would encourage any of you listeners who want to sort of really get into the detail of this to get hold of a copy. Now, then Pope John Paul II was elected, and of course everyone reveres this guy. He was a great ambassador for the Vatican, etc., etc., etc. But he knew exactly what he was dealing with, and he knew how far he could and couldn't go.
Right.
And there is a lot of speculation, and it can only be speculation, that when he was shot because he was starting to take a little bit too much interest in some of the machinations within the Vatican financial community. By the way, the bishop that was perpetrating much of this financial fraud in the days of the first Pope John Paul, was an American bishop. And I'm desperately trying to think of his name. I want to say Bishop Marcinac. And I was just trying to Google that at the same time. I'm sure it was Bishop Marcinac or Marciniak. But anyway, for a period, he was actually a prisoner within the Vatican because there were arrest warrants out for him in both Italy and the US. But eventually, through obviously the various negotiations that were taking place, he was allowed to return to the US, and I think he's dead now, but he saw out his days as Bishop of Las Vegas or something. I don't know what it was.
Bishop of Las Vegas.
Anyway, this was an American bishop who was at the heart of all of this. Anyway, of course, the reality is that the Vatican Bank has always been a player, has always been right at the heart of money laundering. It's been very closely associated, of course, with the Italian mafia. The bottom line is that I think that the current, he resigned today, didn't he? But Benedict has taken resignation because at his age and with his health, I don't think he feels that he's in any shape whatsoever to deal with the coming shitstorm. And it's going to be a shitstorm. Because we're not just talking about the financial issues here. We're talking about the scandals within the church. And, the bottom line is that, as everybody knows all around the world, it's always been a problem. There's always been a problem with Catholic priests and young boys.
Mm-hmm.
And this has been swept under the carpet for centuries. But over the last few years, of course, more and more has come out with the advent of the internet. It's no longer possible to sort of suppress these news stories so that they appear once and once only because they're out there in the public domain.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I think what is going to unfold is going to rock the Vatican and the Catholic Church to the core. Now, let me just make the observation, Robert. There is nothing Christian about the Vatican.
Mm-hmm.
That's not to say that, of course, there are many, many good Christians within the Catholic Church. That's an absolute given. But there is nothing Christian about the Vatican. It is a Babylonian construct. It is a control mechanism. And the prophecies of
Malachi,
yes, the 12th century monk, have reportedly an 80% accuracy to date. And of course, his prophecy is that there would be 112 popes after the one that was sitting at the time he wrote his quatrain. And the next pope will be the 112th pope. And Malachi labeled him as Peter of Rome, Petra Romanus, who would bring about the demise of the Catholic Church and the destruction of the city of the Seven Hills. Now, there are two cities on the planet known as the cities of the Seven Hills. One is Rome, the other one is Jerusalem.
Huh, interesting. So is this Peter Turkos, the Ghanaian bishop who's living in New York now?
Not necessarily, because, of course, the Pope can call himself whatever he wants.
Right.
So, he can take whatever title. Now, it's interesting that Peter, of course, who's Ghanaian, isn't he?
Yeah, he's Ghanaian, living in New York, yes.
But, it's interesting, of course, that he should be regarded as a viable candidate and bear the name Peter.
Yeah.
But, it doesn't really necessarily follow that he would be the next pope.
Right.
But the Malachi prophecy is that the next one will take the title of Peter.
Interesting.
Now, and of course, now we get into the whole debate of if he does take the title of Peter, is he simply playing along to the script?
Right. Yeah. Exactly. That's why it's kind of like, hey, let's make the animals do something funny today, so it looks like the rapture. It's
Exactly.
Yeah.
There's an argument amongst some scholars that the first person to have a Messiah complex was the person that we know today as Jesus.
Right.
Because the missing 18 years could quite well have been spent in Alexandria, which at the time, of course, was one of the most, if not the most, amazing repository of
knowledge
on the planet.
Right.
The Library of Alexandria had been established in 333 BC. So, it had already been around for about 350 years by the time Jesus of Nazareth may well have been a scholar there. And so, of course, he would have had access to all of the prophecies about this coming Messiah.
Right.
So, there is a tongue-in-cheek train of thought that says that, maybe he was just acting out those prophecies.
Right. Right.
And so, we certainly see that there is the potential for this to occur again.
Yeah, absolutely fascinating. And it seems to me, Ian, as you talk about this in the history of the church, really in some ways coming to the fore, not just financially, but also with the pedophile scandal within the church. This reminds me of some of the material that Terence McKenna talked about when he was alive in this concrescence where history gets played out.
Wave zero.
Yeah, and so we get to see, kind of the entirety of the Catholic Church and all of its warts and pus, and I'm assuming that this will hopefully occur throughout a number of institutions, so that we can have almost, for lack of a better term, an exorcism of these institutions that are around us.
Absolutely. Well, let's understand that for many indigenous cultures, and this is one of the things that absolutely fascinates me, that these indigenous cultures, some ancient, some contemporary, they all have many, many similarities in their mythology or folklore. But one of the things that is truly remarkable is that, we know the Mayans had the long count calendar, the 5,125-year calendar, which entered into a new era, a new Bactun, on December 22nd of last year. And, many other cultures, in New Zealand, for example, in the Maori culture, their mythology referring to this particular period in our evolutionary history translates directly as the lifting of the veil.
Mm.
Now, that is the definition of the word apocalypse.
Mm-hmm. Right,
the establishment have hijacked the word apocalypse. And if you ask the average man in the street, woman in the street, what the word apocalypse means, what it will conjure up for them is an image of Armageddon. And Hollywood, of course, has certainly played its role in perpetuating that element of the mythology.
Mm-hmm.
But the word apocalypse simply means the lifting of the veil when truth is revealed. And that, I think, is exactly what is occurring right now. It may not be occurring at the rate that some people want it to occur. That they want the whole thing to go up like a blind in the morning.
Right.
And suddenly let the sort of the sunlight in.
Right.
But this isn't going to happen like that. The establishment and these institutions like the Vatican, they've got a hell of a lot invested in their perverse reality.
Absolutely.
And they're going to do anything, and unfortunately I mean anything they possibly can, to hang on to their version of reality.
Yeah.
But things are occurring that are beyond their control. I'm not necessarily going to try and explain it in reductionist Newtonian terms because I can't.
Yeah.
And anybody who tries to is probably actually deluding themselves. But there is something going on right now that is beyond our physical, empirical, material, Newtonian comprehension. But we see it happening all around us. This veil is being lifted, and people really do have a choice. Just the same as I had that choice, when I was in Kuwait. Did I ignore what I was seeing? Or, did I try to deal with it? But at the same time, ultimately, of course, it was a catalyst.
Right.
And, what is happening is that these catalysts are occurring right across the planet. And, some people are having almost Damascene moments where they're forced to reflect upon everything they thought they knew or their way of life, almost instantaneously.
Yeah.
You know, fortunately, I didn't have to do it instantaneously. I had a little bit of time to adjust. But things are accelerating at a phenomenal rate of knots. It is incredibly exciting. I mean, I am so glad that I'm here in this mortal realm at this particular time, because I think we're going to see, you know, enormous changes this year and, of course, in the coming years. And what is so wonderful to me is, you know, as I go around the country, and of course I was in Australia and New Zealand at the end of last year, and I should be in Sweden and Ireland later this year. As I go around these countries and I see people's eyes open, as you know, they've had their Damascene moment. They're starting to explore this new version of reality. They're starting to take responsibility for themselves and the roles they play, both in the familial sense and also in the community and in the corporate world. It's absolutely incredible.
Yeah, it's amazing. Once people wrap their heads around what they can do, even on a mundane level, you know, it can really change one's life. For instance, I just made a commitment to wipe out as much plastic in my consumption as possible.
Right.
Meaning I'm going to drink out of glass bottles or eat out of glass jars or whatever that thing is. And that was just and I've done a number of things over the course of my life, but something that simple can be a really profound shift in how you begin to live the rest of your life.
Oh, absolutely. And it's ironic you should say that, because I also literally recently did exactly the same. You know, I realized that, the amount of plastic that I was disposing of, especially in bottled water, was horrendous.
Yeah.
So, I got myself a Berkey, which I got in the middle of last year, and I made the effort to get myself some glass bottles that I could seal, and now I do as much as I can in glass. I mean, you're right. Everybody has an opportunity, and some are, of course, way more advanced than others. And there's no right or wrong here. You know, different people are going to go at different paces, and it shouldn't be rushed. You know, because this is something that has to be worked through at a cellular level.
Yeah.
You know, and so consequently, it's, whilst there are many, many similarities in people's journeys, at the end of the day, every individual's journey is unique to themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Ian, I want to have you back on. We're running out of time here. I want to have you back on in the future, and I really want to get into fracking, because it's a huge issue. Before we say goodbye here, I just want to give you my fracking epiphany that I had while doing dishes today. You ready?
Yeah.
My fracking epiphany was the force that's driving fracking in the United States right now, and maybe perhaps in England, but I really felt like it was the United States, is China. China is driving the fracking in this country. And my epiphany was based on debt, and not the debt that we would pay in terms of actual, financial compensation with money, but providing energy for China. Can I get your quick take on that?
Yes, I think you may well be right. Listen, the bottom line is that, China is sitting on something in the region of probably around about $8 trillion worth of U.S. debt.
Yeah.
It knows very well that it ain't going to see that in any monetary form. And, the U.S. really doesn't have anything that China wants to spend $8 trillion on anyway, other than energy.
Yeah.
And, China is, of course, a long way behind the U.S. I mean, China's own hydrocarbons industry is accelerating at quite a phenomenal rate. But nonetheless, it's still a long way behind the U.S. And, the reality is that the U.S. is sitting over enormous deposits of gas, shale gas, coal seam gas, coal bed methane. And, whilst the U.S. nationals are benefiting, obviously, from a reduction in the gas price in the short term, ultimately, the level of production will be so great that the U.S. will be a net exporter. And you're absolutely right. I think it's more than likely that a lot of the debt will be paid off via the flow of fracked gas. And, of course, the cost to the ecology in the U.S. and its impact on the land to be able to support life is horrendous. I mean, this is the issue that I'm taking on tour in the UK, because in the UK we've only literally had a handful of frack jobs, and the good news is that 2 of them resulted in minor earth tremors, and consequently there was a moratorium, although that moratorium has now been lifted. But because it's such a new technology here, the reality is that the vast majority of people are not even aware of the term, and that's something we need to change. What I plan to do is literally take the experiences of people in the US, in Canada, and in Australia, and show the horrendous collateral impact that the fracking has on communities. And the reality is that the corporations and the governments don't give a damn about the people, because they don't represent the people. The governments represent the bankers and the corporations. The U.S. Senate is all bought and paid for.
Yeah.
And so the fact that people are no longer able to farm their land that maybe they've been living on, or their families have been living on for many generations, the fact they're no longer able to farm it because the water is contaminated, the soil is contaminated. They have to have bottled water shipped in, which is in many cases provided by the fracking companies, although without admitting any responsibility. So, this is something that has the potential to literally destroy the planet. And it's not so much a case that, the population alive today will necessarily feel it en masse, but future populations certainly will. Right.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's have you back on again, and we'll go deeper into the fracking issue, because I think the real tipping point with fracking is going to be the Agenda 21 piece and moving people off the land. Yeah, we can get into that later. All right, so let's talk about your website and all these amazing DVDs that you have on your website. Where can people find out more about you, Ian?
Again, my website is Ian R. Crane, that's IANRCRANE, ianrcrane.com. And I also publish 2 magazines in the UK. I don't edit them, I publish them. They're edited by a wonderful couple in New Zealand. But the magazines are Uncensored Magazine, which is an absolutely superb expose of news, views, and analysis that you won't be seeing in the mainstream media anytime soon. And that can be accessed at uncensoredmag.co.uk. And the other one is the New Zealand Journal of Natural Medicine, because, another element that I'm sure you're aware that I've been addressing over the last few years is the pernicious agenda of Big Pharma.
Yeah.
And, of course, the biotech industry.
Yeah.
And its relationship with the Codex Alimentarius agenda, and, of course, that all hooks into Agenda 21. It's becoming increasingly important for people to practice prevention and to do whatever they possibly can to keep themselves in the best possible shape. And natural medicine is about prevention rather than about cure, of course. And Big Pharma wants to keep everybody sick because there ain't no money in health, but there's a shed load of money in sickness.
Right.
So the New Zealand Journal of Natural Medicine, that can be accessed and ordered via the website, which is nznaturalmed.co.uk.
Okay, and they can find those links on your website, I'm assuming.
They can indeed. So ianrcrane.com should certainly be the first port of call.
Okay, great. And what about the DVDs? Can people outside of the UK order your DVDs and watch them in their region?
They're available. I mean, on a worldwide basis. They're all in region-free format. So
okay.
They'll play in any part of the world. We can take orders from anywhere.
Okay, great, Ian. Thank you, and let's get you on again in the not-too-distant future.
Robert, it's been an absolute pleasure, and again, I appreciate the invitation.
Thank you very much. Ian Crane, there he is. Well, if you're listening now, you're listening to the podcast, and that was Ian Crane all the way from the UK, and I want to thank him, and I want to thank Sarah Nash for being part of the show, and we'll try to get Clay on here next Friday. So that's it. Great show, and I want to thank you all for tuning in and listening, as usual. And you know the drill. Use your head to discern what's real, your heart to stay open what's possible. This is Robert Phoenix. You've been listening to Friday Farcast. We'll be back on Monday with the Monday mashup, and I'm sure we'll have plenty to talk about by then. I'll see you.
We are living in a computer-programmed reality, and the only clue we have to it is when some variable is changed and some alteration in our reality occurs. We would have the overwhelming impression that we were reliving the present, déjà vu, perhaps in precisely the same way, hearing the same words, saying the same words. I submit that these impressions are valid and significant, and I will even say this: such an impression is a clue that at some past time point a variable was changed, reprogrammed as it were, and that because of this an alternative world branched off.